One of my fondest memories as a wrestling fan would have to be the WWE Draft. Now, as I said in one of my videos last week, I first got into wrestling in April of 2008. So I was still relatively new and fresh to the product when the 2008 drafts rolled around in June of that year. The WWE Draft, for those unaware, first came around in 2002 with the brand extension, came around in 2004, 2006, as well as 2007, and 2008 would have been one of the first few installments in the series of WWE drafts. It wasn't an annual thing when it first started, but it, of course, built up as the years went by. In 2008, I think was the fourth or fifth installment that they had, but it was held on June 23rd, 2008, 2 months removed when I first got into the WWE. I believe I recall correctly. If I recall correctly, it was on my last day of school. I think in 7th grade. So I was super excited for it. I remember before going to school that morning, watching the USA Network and seeing advertisements for the draft. In the corner of the screen it says Raw tonight. But I remember it was a 3-hour special, and of course, 3-hour shows in this day and age don't really feel that special because they happen every single week on Raw. But from '05 to 2012, before the whole 3-hour concept began, 3-hour Raws were a special thing. Regardless of whether they were good or not, the fact that they brought Raw and SmackDown stars together, and even sometimes the ECW guys, when ECW was still a thing, it felt special. So that being said, I was super psyched for it. Got back from school, was super pumped for the draft that night. I think I had a baseball game or something that day. Came back. Started watching it. Like I said, it was my last day of school, so I was able to stay up. And at this point in time, usually around the time that I started getting into the WWE, I did not watch the full-length episodes. I would record the first few hours of it. I would record the entire thing and watch maybe only the first hour or only maybe first 20 minutes before going to bed because I had school the next day and whatever, and I was in like 6th or 7th grade or 7th or 8th grade. So I would only watch the first hour of it, and this was a rare exception because it was on the last day of school, started the summer season, so I was able to watch the whole thing. So I loved every single fucking minute of it. I know the draft, like wrestling itself, of course, is scripted. It's not random, and if it was, you'd get all this random shit happening. And I realized that. I realized it was script, but that did not take away my excitement for the event. At the time, like I said before, I was only 2 months in as my tenure as a wrestling fan, so I wasn't really considered a smart mark at the time and had no idea where anyone was going, who was being drafted. I remember the $1 Million Mania hosted by Mr. McMahon. I know that was leading the WWE Countdown, that one of those videos on the WWE Network not too long ago as being a big botch. But, I loved it. Not for the giveaway of the $1 million. I couldn't care less about that because I personally didn't win. But just the fact, all the botches that McMahon went through and putting that whole thing together, I thought was hilarious. And that was the last night that ever happened because on that night of the 2008 WWE Draft, the set fell on top of McMahon. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm watching this with my brother, and we're looking over at each other. Is this real? Is this not real? Is Mr. McMahon actually, is he dead or something? Not dead, but is he injured? And I remember just being stunned silent because I thought it was a real thing. And I knew wrestling was fake. I think we all know that by the time I'm 13 years old. By the time I started getting into this, you would think that I knew that this was staged when getting into it. But nevertheless, though, I was stunned silent by the end of that show. But even so, the show itself, we saw the drafting of Triple H to SmackDown as the WWE Champion. Kane brought the ECW title to Raw. CM Punk went to Raw. Who else? Batista went to Raw. And another thing I always loved about the draft, especially on the show, was the fact that we always got a battle royal at the draft. And between the 2 or 3 brands, depending on what year we're talking about here, 09 and 08, they had the tri-branded battle royal between Raw, SmackDown, and ECW, and also in 2007 as well. And then in 2010 and 2011, they had it only between Raw and SmackDown because ECW went defunct. But even still, though, I always loved that. That was my highlight of the night of the WWE Draft. So the 2008 draft I thought was awesome. Jericho went to SmackDown, I think. No, that was the next year. Rey Mysterio went to Raw, so there was and he made his return that night. I think that was the first time I ever saw Rey Mysterio, because when I first got into it in April of 2008, he was gone. He was out with an injury, so that was the first time I saw Rey Mysterio, so that was awesome. But, I love the 2008 draft. The 2009 draft actually came earlier than the one in 08 because it got moved to the month of April. So as opposed to being in the month of June after school ended and all that kind of stuff, It was right after the wrestling year had ended, after WrestleMania had just concluded, and the wrestling year was just beginning once again. So they needed fresh rosters for both the brands. I guess that was their um their motivation behind switching the months, because it was in the month of June for '08 and '07, maybe '06. There wasn't really a draft in '06, but I know when they had RVD and Angle switch brands, that was in June too. But anyway, that was pretty cool. So the fact that it happened in April sooner than expected, I was always excited for that. I think it happened during my April break, during my spring break of my 8th grade year, I think it happened. So I was able to watch that show in full too. Really loved that show. Really enjoyed all the picks that they made that night. Jericho going to SmackDown. Rey Mysterio going back to SmackDown. Maurice and Melina switching brands with the Divas title and the Women's title switching. MVP going to Raw, I thought was awesome with the U.S. Championship. What else happened then? Oh, Triple H went back to Monday Night Raw. I know there was a handicap with, because I know Triple H was feuding with Orton at the time over on the Raw brand, so it was kind of obvious Triple H was going back to Raw. But it was still pretty fun, though. CM Punk went to SmackDown, so the whole night I always enjoyed that, too. '08 draft I loved. '09 draft I loved. 2009, or the 2010 draft was a little different because it was so lopsided. And SmackDown got completely shafted in the 2010 draft. I don't know who they got that year. I think they got Big Show, they got Kofi and Christian, and then and I'm talking about the draft itself. I'm not talking about the supplemental draft, and I'll get into that in a second. But they got Big Show, they got Christian, they got Kofi, and then Raw got Edge, Jericho. Batista was kind of already technically on Raw at this point in time. Who else did they get? R-Truth, John Morrison, I think several others too. I can't really remember at the moment, but the 2010 draft, I was excited for that. I remember waiting all day for that one as well. And the days leading up to a special event like WrestleMania, it always goes slow. I think we can all agree on that. And the draft days were no different. But I don't know, it was just different in the sense that it was just really, it didn't really feel all that monumental because Raw got all these big picks and then SmackDown had nothing. And that show wasn't as great. It was fun for what it was, but it really wasn't all that great. And the end of the night in like a number one contenders match with, I think Sheamus, Batista. No, it wasn't. I don't know. Sheamus, I think, was in there. Yeah, Sheamus, Batista, and Orton. And then Edge turned heel that night. That's what it was. So, yeah, and Edge went to Raw. I remember being really excited about that. Just running around the house and just being really excited about Edge going back to Raw because that was the first time as a fan, as a wrestling fan, that Edge had been on the Raw brand because he first went over to SmackDown in '07, a year before I started watching. So that was really awesome as well. So, like the 2010 draft, wasn't really all that great. Was probably my least favorite of them all, of the ones that I've seen. And then came the 2011 draft, and I guess the rumor goes that it was supposed to be held, it was going back to the month of June, and it was supposed to be held, I think, on June 11th, because that was a 3-hour show, and or maybe in April. I don't know. I think it was supposed to be in June. That was a rumor going around, and that show was supposed to be in Hartford, Connecticut, I think. No, I'm thinking of 2012. No, I'm thinking of 2012. Anyway, I know they were going to hold the 3-hour show for the WWE draft in 2011 in June, but they pushed it back to April, or pushed it back to the month of April where it originally was supposed to be anyway, because Edge retired. His retirement was so abrupt it left a vacant spot in the SmackDown roster. So they had to bring Randy Orton over to the SmackDown brand. I remember being really excited about that. John Cena being the first pick of the night. I remember marking the fuck out about that. I thought that was awesome. I know some people are saying, oh, John Cena's going back to SmackDown later in the night. And I didn't really put two and two together. I thought the final draft pick would be... and John Cena was a result of that Battle Royal, too, that I was talking about before, that awesome Battle Royal that they used to hold every year at the draft. But anyway, I thought the final pick of the night would be The Undertaker. Because at the time, The Undertaker was feuding with Triple H. I thought he'd go to Raw and finish up his feud with Triple H at SummerSlam for that year. That didn't happen. And it ended up being John Cena, and he beat up The Miz and all that kind of shit. But I remember being pissed about that. But regardless, though, I thought that was awesome. So the fact, the whole John Cena swerve, I thought it was pretty cool. Even though it annoyed me in the end, I thought it was intriguing for what it was. Orton being drafted, Sin Cara, Mark Henry, him fucking turning heel that night, that was great. So which is funny because Edge turned heel at the 2010 draft, and then 1 year later at the 2011 draft, Mark Henry turned heel. And he's a babyface now, but he went on to do his whole Hall of Pain shtick, and that all really started at the WWE draft. I remember staying up after the 2011 draft ended and writing an article on how Mark Henry was, how his career would be affected by this new heel turn and move to SmackDown, and he would eventually become the next World Heavyweight Champion. But regardless, so I always thought the 2011 draft, that was a good one. Better than the 2010 one, but 08 and 09 were definitely better. And then came the 2012 draft, or what was supposed to be the 2012 draft. And if you go back and watch my videos from 2 years ago, my old Wrestle Rant videos, I think in the month of April of 2012, a lot of people thought that the draft was happening that year in the month of April because it was a 3-hour show scheduled for, I think, the Monday before Extreme Rules, I think it was. And it never ended up happening. And because at this point in time, the brands were pretty much meaningless. Because the year prior, in August of 2011, or it might have been September, I don't know, either way, we had the death of the brand extension when Triple H, as the WWE COO at the time, said that Raw and SmackDown, the superstars of both shows, can appear on each other's shows. So, in a sense, the brand extension was technically dead. They never really said that verbatim, but Triple H said that officially in like an interview a couple months ago on WWE.com. So the brand extension is dead, and it has been for a number of years now, but I mean, that was maybe news to some people when Triple H finally said it in an interview with Michael Cole a couple months ago. But even still, though, people were saying, I remember reading articles on Bleacher Report of people doing their draft moves and all that kind of stuff. And someone told me, I'll write an article on who you think is being drafted and all that kind of stuff. But as I'm writing, I'm thinking to myself, why? I mean, I'm thinking to myself, I'm having doubts that this thing is actually happening. Because WWE never once confirmed that the draft was happening in 2012. Alberto Del Rio, like a week before this whole thing went down, moved over to SmackDown without any explanation at all. He just moved over there just randomly. So that was really random. That just pretty much defeated the purpose of the draft itself. So that kind of annoyed me. So when WWE never really officially announced it, it pissed me off, and we never ended up getting that show. And it might have happened, I was hoping that it would happen in the month of June, and that show was in Connecticut, and that never ended up happening either, the draft in the month of June. And we haven't had a draft since. We haven't had a draft in about 3 years as I put this, because it was 3 years ago today, on Friday, April 25th, 2011, that the 2011 draft was held, the final WWE draft. So, and I love that WWE draft. The fact that we're not getting another one kind of disappoints me, because like I said before, I always loved the WWE draft. It was one of the highlights of being a wrestling fan for me from 08 to 2011. Maybe I'm just saying that because it was one of my first memories as a wrestling fan. You know, just 2 months in, being extremely excited for it. I know a lot of people pooped all over the draft, that it was useless because people would switch brands anyway. It was predictable. Say what you will, but I always thought it was an exciting event to switch the brands up, and I just miss the brand extension in general, and I've done videos, I've done articles, I've done rants on this in my shows before, but I think we'd be better off with brand extension. I know it has its pros and cons, and some people disagree, but even if it meant just getting the draft back just one last time, it would be awesome. I would love to see WWE do what they did in 2002 and just, you know, pick brands again, reestablish brands for themselves. And it's a different day and age in 2014 with WWE being the empire that it is, the global empire that it is. I don't think they would go back to brands anytime soon, if at all. But if they did, I would love to see it, if only because the drafts were just so freaking awesome. And I know there were other draft memories from 04 with Eric Bischoff drafting Paul Heyman to Raw and Paul Heyman quitting and all that kind of stuff. The initial 2002 draft with The Undertaker going to Raw and later becoming a SmackDown guy, and Triple H going to SmackDown but coming back to Raw anyway during the midst of Evolution. The 2005 draft with Randy Orton being drafted to SmackDown, attacking The Undertaker and rekindling that rivalry. John Cena coming to Monday Night Raw as the WWE Champion and bringing that title back to Raw for the first time in 3 years. So there's a lot of draft memories, of course, that I can't really speak from experience because I wasn't there for them. But based off the ones that I've seen, 08, 09, 2010, 2011, those are my memories of the WWE Draft. And like I said, one of my favorite events of the year as a wrestling fan. Unfortunately, it's no longer a regular occurrence and hasn't been for exactly 3 years. And I'm not going to hold out hope that it'll ever be back because I don't think it ever will be. But even still, it's nice to reflect and reminisce on the memories that were the WWE Draft. So feel free to leave a comment below with any fond memories that you have of the WWE Draft, thoughts on it being brought back, if it was to be brought back, not saying it will be, but your thoughts on it, whether you hated it, you loved it, you thought it was exciting, predictable, whatever it may be. Leave your comments down below. As always, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that great stuff. Really do appreciate it. Thanks for watching, guys, and this is GSM, signing out. Till next week, guys.